The 5 most disturbing things that have happened in schools. So in honor of a new semester starting again, today we're going to look at some of the most disturbing things that have happened in schools around the world. Number 5. A recent Reddit post in the subreddit Creepy documented the horrifying tale of a teenager named Jack. Jack says he attended Westland High School in Oregon. He raised his hand one day to go to the bathroom during class, and on his way to the bathroom felt a strange presence in the hallway, feeling as if something were following him. As he was in the bathroom stall, he started to hear the sounds of nails lightly scraping against the stall door. He looked under the stall door, and there were no feet anywhere in sight. He seemed to be the only one in the bathroom. He says a crack in the ceiling from above him made him look up and see this. There was a hole in the ceiling with an expressionless head staring down at Jack. He describes his reactions as fumbling onto the stall door and becoming paralyzed in fear, gazing up at the ghostly face staring down at him. He says he somehow managed to take this picture of the face with his cell phone, which he already had out, and after that ran straight to the janitor's office to show them. The original picture is in horrible quality. However, someone took it upon themselves to clean the picture up a bit, stabilizing it and removing some of the noise to it. It's not much better, but this is what it looks like now. To his credit, there had been reports of noises in the bathroom by other students. Some thought it was a ghost, some thought it was a homeless person hiding up there, and others just thought he was making it up. Number 4. The hallways of Pocatello High School are allegedly haunted. Unedited video surveillance captured on several occasions strange events, such as lights flickering on and off, cameras shutting off, and most disturbingly, a specter is seen slowly floating toward a doorway, stops, and then moves away. The ghostly figure is as tall as a person, but does not resemble anyone in particular. While the figure could be argued as something hanging in front of the camera, that does not explain the mysterious lights. Officials at the school said that this was only a highlight of what goes on at the school. Students and staff alike have reported strange sounds such as whispering or a piano being played on its own. Officials said teachers and janitors would complain about being left alone in the auditorium due to strange noises and a dark, looming shadow figure. To make this all more disturbing, this school has had a history as well, counting 6 deaths and it's burning down. Number 3. This is the disturbing video of a girl who was believed to be under possession by a demon. She was usually a well-behaved student, who on the day in question was acting completely normal, up until a point where she started screaming uncontrollably at seemingly nothing. She starts to become clearly paranoid of her surroundings and begins to speak and act as if she is someone else. She remembers absolutely no one around her, including her peers and teachers. As she begins to scream and act crazier, she is held down, and a lot of the speaking you hear in the background is prayer for the girl. As you can see, the teachers try to help without any success. It's been reported that the girl was sent to the monastery where she was treated and had been recovered from an evil spirit. Number 2. A couple of Afghan teenagers decided to videotape a said-to-be haunted, abandoned school. They expressed their fear on several occasions throughout the video, but seemed to be more excited to finally be able to videotape this place, as they had been planning to do so for a long time. They don't see anything strange at all besides some odd drawings on the wall and abandoned school equipment. At a later point in the video, though, a strange ghost-like entity makes an appearance. Upon closer analysis, the figure appears to be missing a head. The teenagers claim they did not see anything while filming in the school. They only noticed the entity after watching the video on their computer when they went home. It's become a relatively well-known clip on YouTube by now, and remains one of the more interesting clips of the supposed paranormal. Number 1. According to another Reddit post, a 45-year-old janitor was working overnight at the Visual Art Institute in Massachusetts on a cold, snowy January night. He wasn't comfortable with it, as everybody in the institute was reporting hearing noises coming from inside the walls and in the vents. The janitor would scrub the bathrooms out and hear muffled noises coming from inside the walls. He moved on to the classrooms and studios and heard slight rumbling type noises coming from the vents. Later that night, the janitor went to the basement to fetch a drill from the supply closet when he heard a tapping noise. The tapping noise was louder than any other sounds he had heard. He found out the sounds were coming from a vent. He undid the screws to the vents. He found a man hiding in the vents that jumped out, practically tackling him. The janitor bashed the man in the head unconscious. The man was escorted to the hospital, where he admitted to being homeless, and that he had been spying on people in the art classes and in the bathrooms through tiny holes in the vents and walls. An 18-year-old boy named Liam was home alone for a whole week when his dad and stepmom went on their honeymoon. While playing video games in his brother's old bedroom, who had since moved out, he could hear a kind of scraping noise that seemed to be coming from outside. The strange thing, this room was on the second floor, so it seemed nothing but odd to hear something outside scraping against the walls. He tried to ignore it by turning the video game up louder, but the scraping sounds only became more apparent. He decided to finally look out the window, but it was too dark to really see anything. He left the window open a crack to better hear the noise if it persisted. Liam spun around to discover the window was now open and someone was crawling into the room through it. He was able to push the intruder back out the window before he could fully make it into the room, who then fell 2 stories down into the bushes below. He apparently wasn't too injured, as he was gone within minutes. During a rainy night in central Islip on Long Island, a teenager named Ian was home alone, so he invited his friend Carl over. His friend texted that he would be over in 2 minutes. Ian prepared the video games he planned on playing with Carl and heard the gate to the backyard close. Confused as to why Carl went out back, Ian went out to the backyard. His shed door was open with the light on. As he called out Carl's name walking to the shed, the light inside the shed turned off. Simultaneously, Ian received a text from Carl saying, "I'm here." Ian responded, "Are you in the shed?" He responded back, "I'm at the front door." As Ian looked up, the door to the shed pulled shut with force. Ian ran back into his house and let Carl in. When the police responded to Ian's call, they checked the shed, found the door was back open, and that nobody was inside. "45-year-old Chris was supposed to be working late for the night, so his family went out to eat dinner without him. However, he was unexpectedly able to come home early. As a result, he had the house to himself for a few hours. He went down to his man cave in the basement to watch TV. That was when he heard the backyard basement window flap open, and someone stuck their head inside, peering around the room. He hid behind the couch until the person shut the window. Chris ran upstairs with a baseball bat and shut off all the lights. He waited in the kitchen, which was by the back door. Somebody suddenly reached their arm through the pet door in an attempt to unlock the door. Chris swung the baseball bat as hard as he could at the person's arm, causing them to scream and flee. That same night, sirens roared down the street and stopped at a neighborhood house. It turned out one of Chris's neighbors 3 doors down had been murdered, and when his wife came home, she found the house was ransacked with missing valuables everywhere. And then she found her husband, dead on the kitchen floor with a stab wound in the back of his head. A young girl named Anne was home alone one snowy Friday night. Her parents were out to dinner, and her sister was out with friends. She was taking a nap on her bed. She awoke to the thump. She was sure it came from her closet door, so she got up and bravely opened it. There didn't seem to be anyone inside, so she closed the closet and spun around. There she saw the head under the bed, the head of a man looking at her with an expressionless stare. She fell to the floor screaming. That's when the closet doors behind her opened and someone grabbed her and pulled her in. The man from under the bed emerged and approached her as she was being held down. The two of them carried her downstairs where they put tape over her mouth and tied her arms together. One checked to make sure the coast was clear before carrying her outside, where they planned to put her in their car's trunk. However, about halfway to their car, a large group of teenagers came riding down on their bikes and witnessed it all. Some of them were screaming for help, while some of them got off their bikes and started to slowly approach the two men. They knew they wouldn't get away with it now, so they dropped Anne, jumped into their car, and sped away. She was completely awake and conscious throughout all of this. It's unknown why they didn't just tie her up while she was sleeping. The most realistic possibility is that they simply wanted to scare the girl. This may seem like a crazy, rare occurrence, and you may even call it fake. However, things like this happen all the time and are shown commonly on the news. Perhaps they're just the stories we forget about. "22-year-old Garber still lived with his parents. He was the youngest of 3, so his 2 siblings had already moved out and his parents were out 3 to 4 nights a week. This one particular stormy night, he was home alone in his room when he could swear he heard something hit his window. It wasn't insanely weird, as the weather was pretty bad and something may have just blown into his window. However, a second thud at the window sent his heart racing. He lifted his blind and could see somebody standing out there. Even through the damp windows and the pouring rain, he knew he did not recognize that person. He shut the blinds to send the message to go away. However, he wasn't even able to move away from the windowsill before something else was thrown at the window. Garber opened the blind, and this time even the window, and shouted, "What do you want?" The man down below called back, "Come outside, I want to show you something." Garber went downstairs to call the police. They asked him if he was sure that he didn't know the person and if they had caused any damage. The 911 operator asked Garber to call back if the person continued to harass him or showed signs of wanting to break in. Garber hung up the phone. He wanted to see a better view from down in the kitchen, so he opened the kitchen blinds. Garber called the police right back and informed them that the man was standing at his kitchen window and to send somebody right away. The next time he looked back at the kitchen window, the man was gone. That was the last time Garber ever saw that man. I hope you found this video interesting, scary, or just entertaining. If you'd like to hear more Home Alone stuff, I do have a video about 10 true Home Alone stories. I'm currently a freshman in college. I came home this past week for a funeral, but let's backtrack a little. My senior year in high school, I was in the library during study hall doing some computer science work on the computer since my laptop at home didn't have JCreator on it. Anyways, this boy who was in my class sat next to me since those two computers were the only ones with JCreator. He was a really tall, very pale boy. He had long black hair that covered one of his eyes. He wore an anti-flag tee, ripped jean jacket, and Doc Martens. He never spoke to anyone in class, and I'd never seen him with anyone else. So I took a seat, and he looked up at me like I committed murder. I quickly looked away and started rummaging through my bag as a distraction. As my head was down, I heard him chuckle and then mumble, "Of course." I froze with my head still down towards my bag. I just dismissed it as him talking to his computer, as code can be quite frustrating. I sat back up and quickly typed in my login details. To break the awkwardness, I said, "She assigns too much homework, I can barely keep up." His eyes stayed locked on the computer screen. "You want the answers, don't you?" I laughed and said, "No thanks, I won't learn anything that way." Usually I would have said yes, but I didn't want to see his evil stare again. It was like he was staring into my soul. He laughed again, in that creepy laugh. So creepy that I had to close my eyes and cringe. I opened them and looked over to see him gone. The strange thing was he left his flash drive. I waited about 10 minutes to see if he would come back, but he didn't. Study hall ended at 1 and it was 12:50. I decided I would take it and give it back to him tomorrow in computer science class. I threw it in a little box above my bed. Gotta admit, it was an awesome flash drive. It was a Swiss Army knife with a flash drive in the middle. Here's the crazy part. After that, he never came to school again. He was notorious for being absent, so for the first month no one batted an eye. However, May rolled around and we were all getting ready to graduate. I had completely forgotten about the flash drive, until 2 days ago when I came home. I needed one, and I remembered I still had that boy's. I scanned it with my Norton, and it said it was all safe. I was planning to delete all of his stuff so I could put my PowerPoint for business class on it. Naturally, however, I started snooping through his files. The first thing I saw was a folder named Computer Science. I opened it, and all the answers to every assignment was there. I thought, damn, maybe that's why he left it, so I could copy off of him. Maybe because he knew he was never coming back. I went back, and the second folder was music. I kinda had to open that one to see what he listened to. Surprisingly, not what I expected. There were only 3 songs. Running on Empty by Jackson Browne, White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane, and Helter Skelter by the Beatles. I went back again. There was an untitled folder. Inside it was AP Literature. There were a bunch of essays and various junk. There was one called The Best.Doc. I opened it, and it was merely a 10-page document of notebook pages filled entirely with his first and last name, handwritten. I went back again. This is where it gets weird. He had taken pictures of the emergency escape plan posters on the door in every classroom. There was a picture of a lit cigarette on the bathroom floor, and another picture of some coins on the bathroom floor with a yellow post-it note next to it saying, "Chump change" in all caps. Now this is the weird part. There was a picture of me, taken while I was reading a book in class. From the looks of it, it was my English class that he was not in. There was also a document titled, "Rest in Peace 2... but it was empty when I opened it. I still have no idea if this was a joke or not. For all I know, he never showed up again because he realized that he lost his hard drive. This story happened a few years back to me and a friend who I'll call Allie. We're now both 15, making us 12 when this story occurred. Okay, so me and Allie have been friends since 2nd grade, and we would usually spend all weekends and free time together. We always have been into paranormal and ghost stuff. We had every reason to believe that every house we ever went into was haunted. We would go on ghost hunts like the TV shows with a flip phone to record the sounds. But there will always be one night that stands out to me that still haunts me to this day. It was around midnight, and we were hyper and awake like most kids of our age on the weekends. So we decided to do another ghost hunt in my house. We got the flip phone ready, and we borrowed my dad's touchscreen to actually videotape. This was the first and last time we used that. My basement was not like most, because the house I was living in at the time was very old and therefore very old-fashioned. So down the stairs, there's one main big room that we use for storage, and a little further there was another medium-sized room for the washer and the dryer, and the farthest was a small little cell-type room that we never used, mainly because everyone was too creeped out to go in it. Me and Allie walked down the stairs, turned on the camera and flip phone recorder, and we started asking the usual questions you would see on TV, like, is there anybody here? Give me a sign if you're here, and that type of thing. We finally got tired of it and went back upstairs and into my room to be so excited as we reviewed our first video recording. This was a big step for us because we wanted to be ghost hunters so bad. We were watching and we kinda got disappointed as we didn't find anything in the video or voice recording. Usually we would make something up, like a footstep that wasn't ours to make us feel less bad, but this time we were so excited about the video we didn't even want to make anything up. We couldn't sleep, so we played a few board games, and then we both agreed to review it again because maybe we missed something. And oh boy, we did. While reviewing the tape again, we both could just feel this bad energy coming from it. I guess we didn't realize it before because we were too filled with excitement. We went on anyway, and as we paid more attention, we could actually hear footsteps that weren't ours. Then what showed up on the tape, I still see when I close my eyes. It was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen. The camera was on Allie, and behind her was this figure that looked like a distorted, almost human thing with bright white eyes that almost seemed as if they were watching you through the video. At that point we shut it off, and we were both in complete shock. We couldn't tell my father as he was asleep, being so early in the morning. We both decided to just not tell anybody and keep it our secret. Even though we never went into that basement again, we both still talk and sometimes even dream about it. To this day, I don't know if it was our imagination or if there was something with us in that basement, but I'll never go in there again. So this all happened during Halloween in 2014. My name is Max, and I'm from a small town in Findlay, Ohio. I used to go to a high school at County School about 10 minutes from where I lived called Van Buren High School. Van Buren was a nice little village with good people for the most part, but the only problem was that there were some evil creeps that could be found there if you knew where to look. The biggest hotspot for them to be found was the Van Buren State Park. Everyone knew that the state park had a little infamy to it, as it was known for some rapes and the like. Now, I've been to the park many times with friends and classmates, and nothing bad ever happened to us, so I never thought much of it. I have a lot of good memories of the place actually, like the many times my friends and I would bike the trails and set off the works bombs in the woods or go fishing in the lake. However, fast forward to my senior year at Van Buren on the day of Halloween. My friend Ian and I saw the darker side of Van Buren State Park. The summer before my senior year, I enlisted in the Army National Guard, so it was important that I worked out and stayed in shape. So that day, I asked my best friend Ian if he wanted to go run the trails in the park with me after school, and he said he would, as he likes to work out when he can as well. It was probably about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when I pulled into one of the parking lots, waiting for Ian to meet me there, when I saw this old silver car with a bald and just disturbing man suspiciously sitting in the lot. Knowing that creeps hang out at the parks, I glanced over to check out what he was doing when I noticed he was staring at me and would not take his eyes off of me. It was a very unsettling stare, one that made him look hungry and me uncomfortable. His eyes were wide open, and I'm pretty sure he had a frown, or maybe a grin. We made eye contact, and he nodded at me as if he were trying to say hello, but would not drop his glare. I nodded back but broke eye contact since I was pretty uncomfortable. However, I noticed out of the corner of my eye that he was still staring. At this point, I had enough, and I sped out of there and pulled out of the parking lot. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw he was following me. This made me floor my gas pedal, and I sped to my high school parking lot where I lost him. I called Ian and told him that I was at the high school, and that he might have to deal with this creep alone. And then my stomach sank. I got a text from Ian saying here. So I made my way back there, and sure enough, right when I pulled in, I saw Ian's car, and 2 spaces away was the scary bald guy in the silver car, still staring. I nodded to Ian for him to follow me in his car to a different parking lot at the park, and we made our way over there. We were safe, or so we thought, and got out of our cars to walk down the hill to check out the trails before we ran them. I don't really like to run with items in my pockets, so we began to walk back up the hill when we saw that old silver car circling in the lot looking for us. At the angle we were at on the hill, he must not have been able to find us, although we could see him. We waited a few minutes before walking up the hill because we figured the 2 of us, who were athletes, could take on this one guy. As we reached the top of the hill, he was gone. Feeling pretty safe, Ian and I decided to still run the trails, but I made sure to grab a rock to use as a weapon for my own peace of mind, in case we would run into the possible rapist or killer in the woods. I'll never know the man's intentions, but given that place's notoriety and his disturbing look, it couldn't have been good. Nowadays I've graduated Van Buren, and I'm an infantryman in the National Guard while attending Bowling Green State University. Sometimes when I go back home to visit, I like to go for drives at night, and sometimes I like to check the state park just to see what monsters lurk there. I'm always armed with a knife, and I'm in good shape, but it still makes me uneasy. I'm sure one of these days I might encounter something like that again. But I'm not stupid or crazy, because as soon as I do, I'm hightailing it out of there once again. So as for anyone else, make sure that if you go camping or hiking at state parks, that you are somehow armed, no self-defense, and never go alone. In my room next to my bed is a big storage closet. It doesn't have a regular door like you would expect. It's a kind of big square door without a knob that just comes off when you grab it by the edges. So rewind to several years ago when I was 19. I remember the first time it happened. I went to sleep and woke up in the morning to find that the door had been opened and was leaning on the wooden edge of my bed. Now this wasn't the strangest thing ever, as it had happened in the past. After all, there were no hinges or anything holding the door in. I pushed the door back into the wall and got ready for school. The next night, I woke up around 4 in the morning. I could have sworn I had woken up to a noise. I sat up and looked around my room in the dark, and noticed the door was leaning on the edge of my bed again. Now I was concerned that the edges to the hole in the wall were starting to chip away, and the door could no longer fit as tightly as it used to. I left it that way overnight and fixed it in the morning. The following night, I was having trouble sleeping. It had to be at least 2 hours of my rolling around bed trying to fall asleep. That's when I heard a huge thump, and I knew what it was. I could even see it in the dark. The door fell open again. I was so done with this. I mentally decided to just leave it open from now on. That's when I heard the slightest movement of a plastic bag from inside of the closet. My heart literally skipped a beat when I heard this. There was no draft in the room at all. I hesitantly flicked on the light switch and looked into the open closet. My biggest fear came true when I saw someone inside the closet peering at me in my bed. Within maybe half a second of my turning on the lights, he tried to hide as if I didn't see him. I couldn't even move. All I could do was scream the word "Dad." I screamed so loud it took my dad maybe 10 seconds to make it to my room. I pointed at the closet and he looked inside. Only then did I finally feel safe to get up and stand behind him. My dad crawled all the way in there, and he couldn't find anyone though. He came out and assured me I was just seeing things, and I started to question that myself. Still, I couldn't sleep in that room. I slept on the floor in my parents' room with a blanket. Well, I wouldn't say slept, as before that could even happen, I heard my bedroom door open from down the hall outside, and then someone literally ran down the stairs and out the front door, slamming it behind them. My parents heard it, and it was only then they believed me. We tried to chase whoever it was down, but he was gone. We later found out he was hiding in an empty container inside the closet. Number 5. The Dudley House. Gideon Dudley settled in this house in 1747 on land that was once a Mohawk Indian tribal ground. The surrounding forest was named Dark Entry. Many people are said to have vanished into the forest, while many others who have lived in there have gone insane. People who visit the forest today claim to hear screams coming from deeper in the forest. Visitors to the area have even had the sensation of being pushed by unseen hands, scratched, and witnessed orbs. An anonymous person who got close to the house claimed to have heard manic banging on one of the windows from the inside. He couldn't see who or what it was, as the blinds on the other side were down. However, he could see the blinds being pressed into the window with each bang. Now owned by the Dark Entry Forest Association, it is heavily patrolled by state and local authorities who warn that anyone visiting the site will be arrested. Number 4. The Harlow House. In 1932, 42-year-old Hollywood producer Paul Byrne married 21-year-old Hollywood starlet Jean Harlow. 2 months later, Byrne died under mysterious circumstances in the couple's home. After crime scene tampering from high-level studio executives, his death was ruled a suicide, though suspicions fell on his ex-wife, who committed suicide a day after his death. Jean would die 5 years later of renal failure, and the house later became the home of Sharon Tate, who claimed to have seen Byrne's ghost on the grounds. Sharon Tate, as you might know, was savagely murdered by members of the Manson family. People who have gone to visit the house or just to see it up close in person have reported seeing shadowy figures standing by the windows, and at other times feeling a ghostly presence surround them. Number 3. The Connecticut Funeral Home. Built in 1916, this suburban residential home was used as a funeral home from the 1930s until it was purchased by the Snedeker family of upstate New York in 1986. Upon moving in, the Snedekers found various mortuary items, such as coffin handles and a blood drainage pit. And a series of supernatural phenomena showed up next. First, it started out with just doors and windows opening and closing. Then it got much more horrifying. They would wake up at night to screams coming from around the house, or cries coming from inside closets. The oldest son, who was at the time in the middle of radiation treatment, began to exhibit radical personality shifts, becoming withdrawn and angry. He began writing poetry with necrophilic themes, and during one intense episode, he attacked his cousin with the intent to rape her. His family had him arrested and taken for an evaluation, where he was pronounced schizophrenic. He was removed from the house and seemed to get better, until returning. They moved out sometime that same year. Number 2. The Summerwind House. Located on the shores of West Bay Lake in the far northeast regions of Wisconsin are the ruins of a once grand mansion that was called Summerwind. The house is long gone now, but the memories remain, as do the stories and legends of the inexplicable events that once took place here. The mansion was built in 1916 by Robert P. Lamont as a summer home for he and his family. Nestled on the shores of the lake, the house caught the cool breezes of northern Wisconsin and provided a comfortable place for Lamont to escape the pressures of everyday life in Washington, D.C., as he would later go on to serve as Secretary of Commerce under President Herbert Hoover. But life was not always perfect at the summer home, as legends have it. One night, the basement door began to rattle, and Lamont, thinking it was an intruder, actually fired a pistol through the door twice. It turned out it was not an intruder, however, but rather a ghost. The bullet holes in the basement door from the kitchen remained for many years. Upon the death of Robert Lamont, the house was sold a couple times. It seemed that nothing strange really happened there besides Lamont's encounter with a ghostly intruder until the early 1970s. It was in this period that the family living in the house was nearly killed, supposedly by ghosts. Arnold Hinshaw, his wife Ginger, and their 6 children moved into Summerwind in the early part of the 1970s. They would only reside in the house for 6 months, but it would be an eventful period of time. From the day that they moved in, they knew strange things were going on in the house. It had been vacant for some time, but it had apparently been occupied by otherworldly visitors. The Hinshaws and their children immediately started to report vague shapes and shadows flickering down the hallways. They also claimed to hear mumbled voices in darkened, empty rooms. When they would walk inside, the sounds would quickly stop. Most alarming was the ghost of the woman who was often seen floating back and forth just past some French doors that led off from the dining room. Windows and doors that were closed would reopen on their own. One particular window, which proved especially stubborn, would raise and lower itself at all hours. Out of desperation, Arnold drove a heavy nail through the window casing and it finally stayed closed. Strange phenomena continued to occur all the way until the family moved out. Number 1. On a quiet residential street in a small town sits an old white frame house. On a dark evening, the absence of lights and sounds are the first indication to visitors that this house is different from the other homes that surround it. Upon closer inspection, you'll notice its doors and windows are tightly closed and covered. An outhouse in the backyard suggests that this house does not occupy a place in the 21st century, but somehow belongs in another era or story. A weather-beaten sign hanging from the decrepit front porch warns rather than welcomes. This house is known as the Murder House. The walls still protect the identity of the killer or killers who bludgeoned to death the entire family of Josiah Moore and 2 overnight guests on June 10, 1912. Almost 97 years later, the house's secret continues to draw many visitors to the door. To some, it seems to be speaking. Visits by paranormal investigators have provided audio, video, and photographic proof of paranormal activity. Tours of the house have actually been cut short by children's voices, falling lamps, moving ladders, and flying objects. Physics seem to have confirmed the presence of spirits dwelling in the home, and many have claimed to communicated with them. I was doing some night hog hunting in the woods near my backyard. I was hiding in the tower I had built about a decade ago. In case anyone's wondering, I of course had a night vision scope attachment. I guess I'm what you would consider a hardcore hunter. I don't want to bore you with the unnecessary story prolonging details, so I'll make this short. And I want everyone to know that though I agree this story sounds far-fetched and crazy, it is nothing but the truth. And I in a way actually consider myself lucky that I'll always have such a horrifying story to share. So, while I was sitting in the tower waiting for movement, it finally came. I took aim and found the source. But it wasn't at all a hog, or any kind of animal I was expecting. It was a person, a man wearing all black. Black sweatpants, black shoes, and a black hoodie with the hood over his head. But that wasn't the freakiest part. He was dragging a sack behind him. My heart started racing. I was pretty sure I was witnessing this guy trying to bury a body. I continued to watch him, but then he slowed down, and I swear to God, it looked as if he turned his head up to me. I ducked down under the wooden walls of the tower, shaking in my boots. Yes, I had a gun, but just the idea of using it against a person is horrifying. I lay low, praying to God that he hadn't seen me. It wouldn't make sense if he could, though. It's practically pitch black out here, or at least that was my logic. Seconds felt like an eternity as I waited for the footsteps in the leaves to move elsewhere, but I didn't hear any footsteps. All I heard was the sound of a foot hitting one of the wooden planks on the ladder of the tower. I felt the entire tower vibrate and shake as there were 2 more steps moving up the ladder. At this point, I was asking myself deep down, am I going to be able to shoot someone? But for some reason, whoever was down there decided not to climb all the way up, as I heard them jump back down to the forest ground and began dragging the sack away. I think I stayed frozen like a statue for at least 10 minutes before even peeking over the ledge again. The coast seemed clear. I had to get home and warn the police immediately. I hopped over the ledge and descended down the ladder. I turned on my pocket flashlight, which in hindsight was a stupid move considering the situation, and ran back in the direction of my house. I was only able to run for about 10 seconds or so when I heard the rapid, manic footsteps crunching the leaves from behind me. I took a look over my shoulder, and there he was, inches away from my face. I spun around and shot him in the shoulder. He stopped and screamed in agony, and I took that moment to finish my dash to my house. Again, in hindsight, I should have held him hostage somehow, but that doesn't even matter now. I called the police, who showed up within 15 minutes with a whole search squad, and I led them all into the woods to the exact location where I shot him. There was a faint yet noticeable blood trail spilled onto the leaves, which led past the body bag, which the cops seized, and eventually right to the maniac, who was hiding under a log next to a tree. He was arrested and tried for the murder of Jinkwen Sakanaki, a Japanese corner store owner. I don't know the full story behind it, but I do know I won't forget this one for the rest of my life, and I'll also be telling it for the rest of my life. I'll never forget the time my sister Danielle and I were home alone one Friday night when our parents were out. I was 12 and she was 13. We have an average-sized house, but you can hear everything going on in there. For example, you could be on the top floor and hear someone talking down in the den. We were both doing our own things in our rooms upstairs. That's when I heard it. A slight tapping coming from downstairs in the den. I soon realized it sounded like tapping on the back door. I assumed it was Danielle, so I went down to the den. It was too dark outside to see who was out there, so I flipped on the outside light. It wasn't my sister, but a random guy. He looked mid-40s, long black hair, graying a bit, red cheeks, probably 6'1". Being that this was our backyard door and some stranger was standing on the outside of it, I almost ran away. But the guy was staring at me with a kind of unintimidating look, as if he needed help. I slightly pushed the door window screen open so he could talk to me. He told me he needed to use our phone. I asked him why and why he was in our backyard. He disregarded what I had said and pleaded for me to let him in. I told him sorry and asked him to leave before I would call the cops. I tried to slide the door window back up, but he actually blocked it with his arm and began reaching into my house trying to unlock the door. When I cried for my sister, the guy pulled his arm away. I ran upstairs where I met my sister halfway. She took a peek through the den stairway to the back door and saw the guy standing there still. She called our parents. They told us to call the police and to stay upstairs. We both stayed in our rooms for a while. There was no more tapping or anything, so me being my 12-year-old self trying to be brave, I went downstairs to the den. He wasn't standing by the door anymore, but the door window was lower than when I had left it. Then I realized I didn't shut it in the first place. I walked closer to the door and then looked to my left. The door to the office was now open. I could have sworn it was shut earlier. It was too dark to see anything inside, and there was no way I was going in there. I took out my phone, opened the camera, turned on the flash, and pressed the button. As the phone took the picture, the flash from the camera provided enough light to see the guy who was standing at the door was now hunched over my office desk and in the picture his head was turned to be facing me. I didn't know if he was running at me or not, but I felt like he was, and I ran upstairs and locked the den door. A familiar light tapping began coming from the den door now, and I could hear the man on the other side begging me to open it. I cried for my sister again and bluffed to the man, saying the cops were here. After that, he stopped, and I could hear the back door open and shut. It may have been stupid to say that, as it ruined any chances of the man getting caught and arrested, but it may have also saved our lives, as the cops did not arrive for another 5 minutes. This story is told under the author's father's point of view. Me and my girlfriend's brother had been talking about hunting, and I decided to take him on a hunting trip. It was his first time going, so I wanted to take him somewhere where I was sure he would get a deer. So I asked my uncle if we could go to his place, and he told me we could stay there for the weekend. I told him that was perfect and that we'd stay. Me and Adam got our stuff together and headed that way. It was a secluded property right smack dab in the middle of nowhere in Braxton County, West Virginia. We got to my uncle's. He had his truck started and told them to hop in. We get in, and I ask him where we're going. He told me to my hunting cabin about 10-15 miles out. When we finally made it to the cabin, it fell below our expectations. 2 rooms, very small. As soon as we unloaded our stuff, he was gone. He told us to have fun and waved goodbye from his truck. Later, when we were getting settled for the night, we realized there were no curtains or lights, just lanterns. We didn't like being so exposed, so we hung clothes over the windows. Not long after, we climbed into bed. Then within a few minutes, there was a noise outside, like metal trash cans being banged against one another. Adam started to get paranoid until I said, "It's probably just a bear or something, go back to sleep." I told Adam, "Don't wake me up unless the cabin's on fire." I went back to sleep, at least until Adam started shaking me, saying, "Cliff, wake up, there's someone outside." "No, go back to sleep, there's no one." I stopped, because on the outside wall, besides Adam's bed, a noise, almost like someone or something was raking its claws or nails all the way down the side of the cabin and stopped at the far window. The noise was followed by tapping on the window. Neither of us wanted to move the clothes to see what it was. I told Adam to load his gun, as I did myself. We stayed up all night and left in the morning. We questioned my uncle if he was playing a trick on us. He didn't have a clue what we were talking about. The author says his dad never went back to that cabin. The picture attached was taken by his uncle before he left them, and you could see the cabin in the background. I was 19 years old at the time, working at a sketchy motel. The motel was pretty run down, and the majority of people who stayed there were locals that were just doing things they weren't supposed to be doing. Let's just say the cops came by multiple times a week. I worked as both a front desk person, checking in these creeps all hours of the night, and as a housekeeper who got to clean up their nasty, vomit-smelling rooms afterwards. One afternoon, I was working as a housekeeper in the second building of the motel on the backside furthest from the office. I hated working over there because it not only had the most worn-down rooms, but it was always pretty vacant over there and way too quiet for comfort. I began cleaning one of my last rooms and wanted to get done in a hurry because it was getting late. I was washing the mirror in the room that I was cleaning when all of a sudden, I saw a man in the reflection staring at me. He was mid-50s, dirty, with long, greasy hair. Startled, I screamed, "Oh my God." I told him he scared me. The room I was currently cleaning was vacant, so there was no reason why this man should have been in there watching me clean. However, we just had a meeting on customer satisfaction, and my boss was really pressuring us to be more polite and help the guests any way we could. Sir?" I asked him cautiously. Can I get you anything? Towels?" The man just stared back at me with a crooked grin and held out his hands to me. I thought maybe he was handing me a tip for cleaning his room earlier, but when I looked down, I saw he was holding a $100 bill. Alarms started going off in my head. No one tips $100 on a $40 a night room. The man just smiled and said his name was Terry. He said he was staying in the room next door with his wife Sherry and sort of joked about their names rhyming. He smelled like car oil and alcohol. When I asked him why he was trying to hand me $100, he laughed deep in his throat and said, "Me and my wife were watching you, and we just wanted to have fun with you." I felt like my heart jumped into my throat. No, I can't do that, sir, I'm sorry." I wanted to run out of the room screaming, but he was blocking the door, my only exit. The man smiled again, taking on a softer tone of voice, and invited me to come into his room to meet his wife, just to talk as friends. I nervously told him no again, and that I had a lot of work to do for the day. I prayed to God he would just go away, and eventually he did. He grunted and walked off in what I assumed to be the direction of his room. My mind began racing. There is no wife, I thought. This man could try and kidnap me. I was 110 pounds at the time and not very strong. He could easily overpower me. I locked the room from the inside and went directly to the phone to call my manager at the front desk, but the phone wasn't working. Adrenaline began pumping through my veins, and despite what I was always told not to do, I was panicking. Did he cut the line? No, I thought. This is a crappy motel. It happens all the time. But I just have to get out. I remembered that I had my cell phone out on my housekeeping card, but that was outside the locked door. I'd have to open the door to get it. I cautiously opened the door to the room that I was cleaning and peered out. I didn't see anyone, so I frantically began searching my cart for my cell phone. I was wasting too much time looking for it, so I just decided to run as fast as I could and make a break for the front desk in the office. Then from behind me, I heard the man again, but this time he was screaming to someone else, "She's running, she's getting away." I could hear his shoes slamming against the pavement after me. I quickly turned the corner, grabbed my keycard, and let myself into a stockroom and locked the door. Within moments, I heard the sound of the dirty guy and someone else running outside, searching for me. I stayed in that stockroom for 30 minutes shaking until I could no longer hear him searching for me. I finally got the courage to run the rest of the way to the front desk. When I made it there, I collapsed into my boss's arms and he called the police. The man and whoever else was in the room with him peeled out before the cops could arrive, and I was beyond shaken up. According to the police who ran a search, this wasn't the first time he had done something like this, and he was actually wanted for sexual assault, gross sexual imposition, and in the past was once charged with rape. A few weeks later, on what happened to be my birthday, this guy was caught. A few weeks after that, I quit. I will never again work at another motel. Ouija boards have long been a supposed way to connect with spirits and demons. They're sold in most board game aisles and toy stores, and work by one or more participants placing their hands on a plastic or wood piece called a planchette with a small glass circle in it, which is used to highlight a single letter on the board. The participants are then supposed to ask any question, and the piece is supposed to move to form answers out of the letters, supposedly by spirits. The game is normally played as a gag within groups of friends, and the piece is usually moved by one of the participants as a joke or even unintentionally. However, there are countless stories of people who claim to have actually contacted demons and had serious repercussions because of it. Number 6. A mother and daughter who were reportedly told during a Ouija board session that they would soon die were both critically ill in the hospital following a fire at their home, which was engulfed in flames mere hours after the Ouija board made its grim predictions. The two were treated in a hospital after the fire. It's said that the mother and daughter used the Ouija board in an attempt to contact their dead dog on the night before the fire. This beloved family pet was dismembered and killed by the mother's husband, Paul Carroll, who initially claimed he killed the dog because it became possessed following a previous Ouija board session. Paul was sentenced later that month for causing unnecessary suffering to an animal. Following the Ouija board session where the mother and daughter attempted to contact their deceased dog, their neighbor Donna Sowerby revealed that Katrina Livingstone had confessed that the Ouija board had predicted their deaths. Number 5. St. Andrew's Boarding School in Delaware is a well-known private boarding school with a very positive reputation, which may make it more surprising that a group of boys snuck out past curfew one night to use a Ouija board in the woods. The group of 4 came prepared, equipped with candles and a flat surface to place the board and candles on. The 4 boys asked the board various questions, playing religiously, trying not to make a joke of it. There was no movement until one of the boys asked the question, "Will anything bad happen in my future?" The piece then slowly began to move, spelling out the words, "right now." One of the boys, Ferlin Mako, suddenly started twitching and jerking his arms and head. He then turned and focused on one of the boys next to him with a devilish stare before lunging at him and screaming, "I don't know you." The 2 other boys grabbed Ferlin off of him and he shortly passed out. The 3 boys carried him back to his dorm room, where they left him in his bed. The next morning, Ferlin showed no signs of remembrance from the previous night. They fessed up and took him to the nurse to see what could have been wrong with him, but of course, she didn't have much of an explanation. Number 4. A Redditor who says he was about 12 or 13 was spending the night at his friend Michael's house, goofing around with a Ouija board with Michael and his sister in their basement. They were just kind of scaring themselves, moving the planchette around for fun, not taking it very seriously, when they got a rather disturbing message. They asked the question, "Where are you?" And in response, the planchette started spelling something. I-C-A-N. It continued on until it spelled out the sentence, "I can see you through the window." The 3 kids laughed, thinking one of the others spelled out the phrase. There was a small window in the basement room where they were, and just the backyard and woods past the driveway were visible through the window, though it was much too dark to see anything outside. They all looked at the window anyway as a kind of natural response, and as they did, they heard that sound. The stomach-churning sound of someone or something from outside in the dark backyard at 11:30 at night viciously knocking on the basement window. Being the young kids they were, they all screamed until Michael's dad came rushing downstairs. When they explained what happened to his dad, he took them outside with the backyard lights on to search for anyone who may be lurking around. As soon as they told him about what the Ouija board said, Michael's dad ushered them inside and suggested they go to bed. That was when he stopped believing what the kids had said. Number 3. In 2014, 3 American friends were taken to the hospital after reportedly becoming possessed by evil spirits while playing with a Ouija board. Alexandra Huerta, aged 22, was playing the game with her brother Sergio, aged 23, and 18-year-old cousin Fernando Cuevas at a house in the village of San Juan in southwest Mexico. But minutes into it, she apparently started growling and thrashing around in a trance-like state, as this video captures.
Tranquila ya.
Meanwhile, Sergio and Fernando also reportedly started showing signs of possession, including feelings of blindness, deafness, and hallucinations. Paramedics were called and took the 3 to the hospital. They restrained Alexandra to prevent her from hurting herself before treating the 3 with painkillers, anti-stress medication, and eye drops, which seemingly worked. The director of public safety in a nearby town said the medical rescue of these 3 was very complicated. They had involuntary movements, and it was very difficult to transfer them to the nearest hospital because they were so erratic. He said they spoke of feeling numbness, double vision, blindness, deafness, hallucinations, muscle spasms, and difficulty swallowing. Alexandra's parents called paramedics after a local Catholic priest refused to perform an exorcism on the 3 because they were not regular churchgoers. Number 2. 3 brothers were using a Ouija board while their parents were out on a cold, rainy night. They were playing the game on the dining room table with the lights dimmed, asking typical questions. They started with questions like, "What is my name?" and "What is your name?" which didn't summon any responses. Then they asked the question, "Is anybody there?" which caused the planchette to slowly move to the word "yes" at the top of the board. The boys then asked the board, "When will we die?" and the board formed the sentence, "Death comes now." Only minutes later, they received a disturbing phone call. It was the boy's father on the other end, crying hysterically. He told one of the boys that he swerved off the road into a tree and their mom died on impact. The dad later blamed himself for driving without getting enough sleep and said he thought he saw someone standing in the middle of the road, so he tried to swerve out of the way, but the slippery roads only caused him to lose control off the road. Number 1. Frank and Sarah Piscatelli and their friend Joe Pedenzin were in their basement playing with a Ouija board on December 15th, 2013. A recent event motivated them to try the Ouija board. Apparently, Frank and Sarah's grandmother contacted her dead husband just days before she passed away using one. Frank and Sarah wanted to contact their grandmother, so they brought along a friend to bring in more energy to the board to increase the chances of getting a response. Instead of contacting their grandmother, however, they allegedly contacted a demon who introduced itself as Zozo. Instead of answering the questions the kids asked, the board spelled out random answers that didn't even relate to the questions. Frank demanded that the demon let them speak to their grandmother, and that's when the lights clicked off in the basement. The power did not go out. They all heard the light switch flick off from the bottom of the stairs. One of them grabbed a flashlight and shined it over to the bottom of the stairs. And for a brief moment, saw a black figure standing by the light switch. Even in the light provided by the flashlight, the figure was completely black. Just as suddenly, the lights turned back on and the figure was gone. The three ran upstairs and locked the basement door. The next day, they tucked the Ouija board back in the closet and never touched it again. Frank and Sarah both agreed that the black figure they saw resembled their grandmother. With police being in the front lines of investigating everything out of the ordinary, it's no surprise they'll come across some disturbing things. Some of the findings on this list are weird, some shocking, and some just disturbing. So, here are 6 disturbing police discoveries. Number 6. In Glen Rose, Texas, neighbors of Tasha Chantel Hatcher noticed her acting odd and immediately notified police. And it's a good thing they did, as the police found something completely unexpected and horrifying inside of her oven. Now, Tasha and her neighbors lived in a relatively peaceful area. However, one day when some of Tasha's neighbors noticed her acting a bit nervous and blasting music, they knew something was wrong and thought it would be best to get the police to investigate her house. Tasha is a single mother of a 2-year-old girl named Nevaeh. Tasha always seemed like a playful and caring mother, which made this whole situation just more shocking. When the cops arrived, they found Tasha's daughter inside of the oven, which had been turned on. Tasha admitted to willfully doing this, and as a result of her actions, her daughter suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns and was hospitalized. She has since been put under foster care. Tasha has been charged with serious bodily harm to a child. She is currently being held on a $300,000 bond. Number 5. In 1969, 3 people riding in a 1950 Chevy were reported missing and were never found.
Only a year later, 3 teenagers riding in a 1969 Camaro were also reported missing. For more than 45 years, their location had remained a mystery until just recently when all 6 of them were found inside both cars at the bottom of Foss Lake in Oklahoma. Jimmy Williams, Lee Johnson, and Michael Rios went missing while on their way to a football game. This was on November 20th, 1970. The Camaro, belonging to Jimmy Williams, was found at the bottom of Foss Lake by police divers who were actually in the middle of a training exercise. But that wasn't all they found. They also discovered a second car in the lake, which also had 3 bodies inside. The bodies were identified as 69-year-old John Alva Porter, who was the driver, and his friends Nora Duncan and Cleburne Hammock. They had been missing for more than 50 years. The circumstances of these deaths are still not fully known, but the police believe foul play to be the most logical explanation. It's believed that it's just too much of a coincidence that 2 nights out so long ago that happened just within a year ended in such an eerily similar fashion. It will likely never be known just what happened all those years ago. Number 4. In December of 2015, Russian officers found 37 unmarked sacks stuffed with sawdust sitting on railway cars. At first glance, the mysterious bags just seemed to contain wood shavings. However, the officers discovered that hidden inside of the bags were hundreds of severed bear parts which smugglers intended to sell on the black market. Police confiscated 527 bear feet, a bear muzzle, bear gallbladders, and 3 musk deer glands. The body parts were destined for Asia, where they would be used for medicine. In fact, Asia is responsible for the poaching of a lot of animals. They hold beliefs that many animal parts, for example ivory and tusks, can cure diseases such as cancer. A disappointing statistic has shown that bears in the past few years have been becoming a much bigger target to poaching. Number 3. During Halloween night of 2015 in Slingerlands, New York, police discovered that 2 Halloween decorations were not what they seemed. Police were cruising Veeder Road in a rather wealthy area when they coincidentally received a call from a resident on the same road telling them that they saw 2 dead body decorations hanging on their front tree. The creepy part was that they didn't hang anything on their front tree. Police arrived within minutes and saw exactly what the woman was talking about, but upon closer inspection, realized these were not decorations at all, but rather 2 real decomposed bodies. The woman recalled 2 men who were suspiciously walking around out front in her house about an hour earlier, though she couldn't give any worthwhile details about the 2 men. It's unknown if these 2 men the woman mentioned were responsible for this, who these dead bodies belonged to, if and why these 2 men killed them, and why they targeted her house. Number 2. In 2014, there was a Reddit post asking people about their scariest experiences as a police officer. A Redditor whose account has since been deleted replied to the post, explaining a situation he and his partner for the night had encountered. There was a call to inspect an air vent at an elderly woman's house, as she suspected there had been an animal or something up there, as a large part of the vent in the living room was caving down as if something were in there. She had just gotten back from a vacation that day with her daughter to find this. It was a slow night and they were the closest to the house, so they were instructed to check it out. Stepping into the house, they could immediately smell a foul odor filling the air in the house, an odor the old woman said she couldn't smell. The old woman showed the officers the specific air vent where she saw the bulge. The vent cover was very large and old-fashioned. It had 4 big screws that kept the cover on. The smell was most unbearable by this vent. The cops knew something was dead inside of there. They undid the screws and shined a light into the vents. They were disturbed not to see a dead raccoon or something they were expecting, but rather a dead person. They had a hard time dragging the body out as it was stuck in the narrow duct, but they were soon able to get him out and identify him. He was a bald black man, mid-40s, wearing an unzipped black hoodie with a stained undershirt underneath, denim jeans, and brown work boots. He had a knife tightly gripped in his stiff fingers, which the cops assumed was meant to harm the old woman. This duct led to an air vent outside, which is how the man was able to break in the first place. The author of the post said that since the man was apparently stuck in the vent for days in the summer heat, he could have died of a certain number of things, most likely of thirst. Number 1. On September 12, 2015, a disturbed 38-year-old Swedish doctor whose name has not been revealed drugged a woman he knew with strawberries he had laced with Rohypnol, raped her, and then drove her across state to imprison her inside an underground bunker he had built on his property. The woman continued to endure rape and physical harm for a few days until September 18th, when the doctor drove her back to her home 350 miles away to collect her belongings. However, the doctor grew nervous when he arrived to the house to discover police had ransacked the place. This made him decide to take her directly to them, to have her inform the authorities that she was okay. Of course, the police knew better and pulled her aside to get the real story out of her. The cops immediately arrested the doctor and searched his home, and what they discovered there proved just how insane this man was. His house contained rubber masks of bearded men and old women, syringes, birth control pills, condoms, the wheelchair he used to carry the woman from her home into his car, and perhaps most disturbingly, wrist and ankle chains attached to the wall. Police speculated by the design of the bunker, with a bathroom and covered courtyard, that the doctor had planned on keeping the woman locked up there for several years. Police also believe that he was planning on doing this for years. He clearly built this bunker for the sole purpose of keeping one or more victims captive. Friends of the doctor were shocked and couldn't believe he would do something like this. He was described as helpful and polite. The exact sentencing for this doctor is unknown, but it's certain he'll be going away for a long time. As a little bonus clip, here's an interesting story. A snorkeler called the emergency services after spotting what he thought were human remains at the bottom of a lake. Police sent someone from their diving team to investigate. He took a camera down there to record the remains and found two bodies sitting upright in plastic garden chairs and appeared to be having a tea party. One of them held this sign that read, "Bernie living the dream in the river." While the figures looked very real from a distance, upon closer inspection the diver realized that they were plastic fakes planted by scuba divers as a gag. If these were real, this would have made for a pretty horrifying find. Feel free to follow me on Twitter, like me on Facebook, and I will see you in the next one.